Tonight on The Sleepy Scientist, we're taking a slow and thoughtful journey, back in time. But not just to the age of dinosaurs, no, tonight we go deeper. We explore how dinosaurs still shape the world we live in today. From ancient forests to the quiet halls of museums. From science labs to children's drawings on bedroom walls. Dinosaurs are more than fossils. They are teachers. They are symbols. They are echoes of a planet always in motion. Through 28 gentle chapters, we'll wander through soft questions. How did dinosaurs help shape our modern climate science? How do they live on in birds, in robots, in imagination? And why, after all this time, do they still stir something in our hearts? This is a story not just about creatures long gone, but about time, change, and the quiet beauty of mystery. So, wherever you are, tucked in bed, or drifting off under starlight, let your breath slow, and your thoughts soften. Because the story of dinosaurs is still unfolding. And you're part of it, too. Crescent moon sauropod dizzy. The bones beneath the clock. There's a museum in the middle of the city. Most people pass it without stopping. Its tall stone arches and old copper dome, blending into the noise and movement of modern life. But every night, after the crowds go home, and the janitor turns off the last light, the museum begins to breathe again. Not loudly. Not literally. Just a soft sigh. As if the building itself is remembering. And in a quiet office on the second floor, with books stacked like sleepy towers, and a mug of tea always half finished, Dr. Leia sits at her desk. She isn't working. Not really. She's dreaming. Eyes open. Pen in hand. As she looks at the great fossil behind her. A long, gentle curve of bones. The tail of a dinosaur. Not fierce. Not frightening. Just, ancient. And still. Most people think of dinosaurs as loud and wild. All teeth and thunder. But Leia knows better. She knows they were much more than that. Some had feathers. Some sang. Some walked gently through ferns. As the sky shimmered with dragonflies and dawn. She writes in her journal. The world thinks they're gone. But they've simply changed. Outside, the city ticks on. Streetlights blink. Phones buzz. Clocks keep time. But beneath it all, in the bones beneath the museum's floor, there's another rhythm. Older. Softer. And that's what Leia listens to. Because this isn't a story about extinction. It's a story about continuity. About how the ancient world still echoes in today's one. Not in roars. But in wings. In roots. In rhythms. Dr. Leia leans back in her chair. And looks at the sky through her office window. A bird flies past. Wings outstretched, gliding in a slow spiral. And she smiles. There they are, she whispers. The ones we thought we lost. A forest from long ago. Dr. Leia closed her eyes. Not to sleep. Not yet. Just to listen. The museum was quiet now. But in that quiet, something stirred. Soft and slow, like wind moving through leaves. And then, something shifted. The scent of dust gave way to the smell of ferns. The steady hum of city lights faded into birdsong. Deep and echoing, like flutes in the forest. She opened her eyes. And the office was gone. She stood beneath trees taller than any building. Not pine or oak. But giant green umbrellas of fronds and moss. The air was thick with warmth. Not heavy. Just full. Like the pause before a gentle rain. A dragonfly the size of her hand hovered nearby. Its wings shimmering like stained glass. This is how it begins, she thought. Not with thunder, but with stillness. In the distance, something moved. Not crashing. Not hunting. Just walking. A dinosaur. But not the kind from movies. Not roaring or running. Just, grazing. Its long neck stretched toward the treetops. Pulling down leaves with careful lips. Its eyes blinked slowly, like a cow at sunset. Leia didn't move. She didn't need to. The creature wasn't afraid. It had never known a world with people in it. And it had no reason to fear. A smaller dinosaur darted between trees. Feathered and bright. Its tail flicking like a painter's brush. Feathers, Leia whispered. The beginning of flight. She watched it leap onto a branch. Then hop to another. Not flying. Not yet. But dreaming of it. The dream of sky. Was already in its bones. And suddenly, Leia understood. Birds weren't just related to dinosaurs. They were dinosaurs. Still living. Still flying. Still singing the memory of a world that hadn't truly ended. In the trees above, a pair of strange feathered creatures chirped softly to one another. Their heads tilted. Their wings tucked in. They were nesting. Not monsters. Not legends. Just parents. The world changed around them. Leia thought. But they stayed. Not by fighting. But by becoming. The forest grew quiet again. The air shimmered. And just like that, she was back in her office. The fossil tail curved gently behind her. The city outside glowed with tiny lights. And on the windowsill, a bird landed. A small one, with speckled wings and an amber eye. It looked at her. Just for a moment. And then it flew away. The shape of survival. In her office, Dr. Leia ran her fingers softly along the spiral in her notebook. Not drawn. Not planned. Just something her hand had started sketching as she thought of the bird. And the forest. And the quiet dinosaurs of long ago. She whispered. They didn't disappear. They adapted. The story of extinction is loud. All fire, and impact, and endings. But the story of survival? It's quiet. And slow. And beautiful. Back in her mind's eye. Leia closed her eyes again. And once more, the air shimmered around her. The museum faded. And time folded back like soft pages. She stood in a colder world now. Ash still drifted through the sky. And the sunlight was pale, like early dawn that never fully arrives. The big dinosaurs, the towering ones, were gone. But life had not ended. It had simply changed. Small creatures scurried between roots. Some had scales. Others had feathers. Some were digging into warm hollows beneath the ground. Carrying food. Carrying memories. They had learned something ancient. Not to fight change. But to move with it. A tiny creature caught her eye. About the size of a cat. Its body was sleek. Its snout pointed. And its claws curled softly into the earth. It sniffed the air and darted into a burrow. Leia knelt down and saw inside. A small nest. A quiet place. A promise that life continues. The dinosaurs that survived, she thought, didn't do it with power. They did it with softness. They stayed small. They stayed curious. They became something new. Above, clouds cleared briefly. And a strange shape soared across the gray sky. Feathers now fully formed. Wings strong and silent. It circled once. then disappeared behind a ridge. Not gone. Just moving forward. Leia opened her eyes. Back in the museum. The fossil still rested where it always had. But now it looked less like a relic. And more like a bridge. Between past and present. Between who we were. And who we could become. She wrote softly in her notebook. Survival isn't always about strength. Sometimes, it's about listening. And letting go. The birds remember. Dr. Leia sat near the museum's window. Tea warm in her hands. The city humming quietly outside. From a tree branch nearby. A bird was singing. Not loudly. Just a few sweet notes. Soft and rising. Like a thought spoken in the air. And then carried away by wind. She listened. And suddenly, she was there again. This time, the forest was lighter. The world had warmed. Green had returned. And the air was full of motion. Feathers. Wings. Songs. Tiny birds darted between leaves. Some no bigger than her hand. Others long-legged and elegant. Gliding over shallow waters. Each one was different. But they all carried the same quiet truth. They were dinosaurs. Not fossils. Not memories. Living, breathing echoes of the ancient world. She followed a bird through the trees. Its feathers deep blue, its tail forked like a ribbon. It stopped on a branch and tilted its head at her. And then it sang. Not just a sound. A language. Older than words. A memory in melody. She thought of how humans think of birds. Background noise. Morning alarm clocks. Decorations on branches. But here. Now. They were something more. Messengers. Carriers. Time travelers in plain sight. One bird's claws looked like fingers. Another's eyes held a depth. That felt almost mammalian. Leia could see it clearly now. The slow shift from beast to bird. From thunder to feather. From roar to song. She sat on a stone by a stream. As dozens of birds gathered in the trees above. Different shapes. Different sounds. But every note. Every flap of a wing. Was a reminder. We never left. You just stopped recognizing us, And then. One bird flew close. It hovered for a moment. Its feathers shimmered like layered leaves. Green, gold, and dusk blue. And then, without sound. It blinked once. And flew off. Into the sky. Back in the museum. Leia smiled. The same bird from earlier was still on her windowsill. Still singing. Still present. She whispered. You are older than we know. And wiser than we see. Thank you for staying. She opened her notebook and wrote. The birds remember. And if we listen closely. We might remember too. The garden they left behind. It was late evening in the museum. The air was still. And the pages of Dr. Leia's journal lay open on her desk. As if waiting for the next piece of the story. To fall gently into place. She glanced at a fossil on the windowsill. Not a bone this time. But a leaf. Delicate, pressed flat in stone. Ancient. But familiar. She ran her finger along the stem and whispered. You were here long before us. Before birds. Before blossoms. Before cities. And then, as if invited by memory. The museum faded again. The air grew warm. Rich with the smell. Of damp earth and green. She was in a prehistoric forest. Not dark. Not dangerous. Just full. Everywhere she looked. Ferns curled like sleepy question marks. Mosses glistened with dew. And trees stretched upward like slow-moving rivers of bark and breath. This was the world beneath the dinosaurs. Not just a backdrop, but a living, breathing world of its own. Here, Leia realized something quietly profound. The dinosaurs shaped the earth. But the plants shaped them too. She knelt beside a strange flower. One unlike anything in her time. Its petals were broad and waxy. Its scent sweet and unfamiliar. A tiny, bird-like dinosaur approached it. Drawn by its color. Its promise of nectar. It poked its beak gently into the flower. And golden pollen dusted its nose. The first pollinator, Leia whispered. The first partnership. Around her, plants reached and bloomed. Not wildly. But patiently. Their shapes adjusting to the steps, wings, and grazing habits of the dinosaurs who walked among them. And long after the giants were gone, these plants remained. Not just surviving, but spreading. Through time. Through soil. Through us. She returned to the museum. But now, every potted plant, every blade of grass beyond the window, felt older. As if it had seen everything. And remembered it, quietly. She sipped her tea. And opened her journal. Flowers were not invented for us. They were first gifts to creatures long gone. And yet, they still bloom. The ones who waited. Dr. Leia placed her tea gently on the table. She had just written a single word in her journal. After. What happens after something ends? After the spiral slows? After giants fall? Most people think the story stops. But Leia knew that endings are never truly silent. They ripple. Softly. Into what comes next. The museum faded around her once more. And time folded like a gentle quilt. The forest returned. But it was quieter now. The towering dinosaurs had vanished. No more heavy footfalls. No more low, rumbling bellows. Instead, there was hush. Stillness. Recovery. From deep beneath the soil. And the hollow trees. And the cracks in stone. The mammals emerged. They had always been there. Hiding. Waiting. Curling into the shadows. As thunder walked above them. They were small. Mouse-like. Shrew-like. With whiskers, and fur. And hearts that beat quickly beneath soft ribs. Leia watched as one poked its head from a fallen log. It sniffed the air. Ears twitching. Nose catching the scent of berries. Not a conqueror. Just a survivor. They weren't the loudest, she thought. But they were listening. As plants bloomed again. And the skies slowly cleared. These small beings explored the world. The dinosaurs had left behind. They began to climb. Dig. Leap. And eventually, dream. Their paws shaped tunnels. Their eyes adapted to the light. Their brains grew. Not out of dominance. But necessity. Curiosity. Connection. The mammals didn't replace the dinosaurs. They continued them. In a new direction. One creature curled beneath a fern near Leia's feet. Its body soft. Its breath slow. She leaned closer. Its eyes opened. Just for a moment. And in them, she didn't see fear. She saw future. Back in her office, Leia opened her journal and wrote. The ones who wait are often the ones who carry the story forward. Not loudly. But completely. Asterisk. She paused. Watching the night deepen through the window. And somewhere beyond. In the quiet places between stars. Life kept evolving. Echoes in the body. It was just past midnight. The museum was hushed. A low, comforting silence. Like the sound of pages resting between thoughts. Dr. Leia sat with her hand on her chest. Feeling the slow rhythm of her heartbeat. Steady, she whispered. And old. Because the beat within us. Soft, dependable. Like the ticking of a patient clock. Has been passed down. Through the bodies of creatures. Who walked this earth long before us. And so, once again. She closed her eyes. And this time. Instead of going back. She went inward. Inside the body. Beneath thought and language. Is a history. Written in pulses. Shapes. And strands. Leia imagined herself shrinking. Small as a cell. As an atom. Drifting gently through the warm corridors of life. She saw bones. Not just hers. But bones that remembered walking on 4 limbs. Before they stood tall. Bones that once held tails. Clavicles that had once helped wings unfold. Vestiges, she whispered. Reminders. The curve of the pelvis. The structure of the hand. Even the spiral inside the ear. All quietly echoing. What came before? She floated past DNA. Long, coiled, endless. A soft, glowing script. That held the stories. Of reptiles, birds, mammals, and more. We did not begin with ourselves. She thought. We are a continuation. We are the living memory of transformation. And when she finally returned. To her desk. Her tea now cool. And the city outside sleeping. She felt something new. Not smaller. But deeply connected. She opened her journal. And wrote. Asterisk, our bodies are not only human. They are layered with time. They remember the sky. The soil. The scale. The wing. We are made of everything that came before. Asterisk. She smiled. Placing a hand again on her chest. One beat. Then another. Each one. An echo. From long, long ago. The ground beneath their feet. It had rained earlier that day. And as Dr. Leia stepped outside the museum for a breath of air. The pavement was dark and dappled. Soft with puddles. Glistening like tiny mirrors. She looked down and smiled. Her boot print pressing gently into a patch of mud near the steps. One footprint. One quiet impression. And just like that, she remembered. They left footprints too. And the earth never forgot. That night, she sat quietly with her journal open. But didn't write. Instead, she closed her eyes. And followed a memory beneath the surface of things. This time, the earth was wide. Green and golden. Rippled by time and wind. She stood on a vast riverbank. The air warm and still. And there they were. Footprints. Pressed into ancient mud. Some small, 3-toed. Others massive and round. The weight of a walking world behind them. She knelt beside one. Placing her hand inside it. Still there. Still real. Still part of the earth's memory. She began to walk alongside the trail. Each step told a story. A herd moving to water. A mother turning to wait for her young. A creature pausing. Not from fear. But to listen to the wind. These weren't just tracks. They were threads. stitched into the soil. And then she saw more. Not just the feet. But what followed. Where they walked. Plants had changed. Ferns parted. Soil shifted. Rivers rerouted by the slow migration of limbs and tails. They shaped the land, she thought. Not with tools. But with presence. Even the rocks told stories. Weathered by claws. Shifted by weight. Worn smooth where ancient tails had dragged through sand. And over millions of years. Those tracks filled with sediment. Then stone. Then silence. Until we found them again. She opened her eyes. Back in her chair. Back in the now. She looked at her own footprints by the door. Just as temporary. Just as telling. She picked up her pen. And wrote. Asterisk, every step leaves a memory. Even if no one sees it. Dinosaurs shaped the ground beneath us. And we still walk in the echoes of their path. Asterisk. The dragons we remember. The museum had grown quiet again. Outside, a light breeze tapped gently on the windowpanes. Like a question too polite to interrupt. Inside, Dr. Leia sat in her reading chair. Wrapped in a blanket. And surrounded by shelves filled with books. Some scientific. Others filled with stories. She reached for a well-worn volume. A book of old legends. Dragons. She smiled. Fire-breathing serpents. Winged beasts sleeping on treasure. Scaly giants who flew above villages and vanished into clouds. It made her wonder. Why does almost every culture have stories of dragons? Where did that shape come from? And why does it feel familiar? She closed her eyes. And the stories began to breathe. This time, she stood in a wide, misty plain. The air was cool and heavy. And in the distance, a shape moved. Long neck. Coiling tail. Glinting eyes. Not a monster. Not a myth. A dinosaur. But to ancient humans. Who might have stumbled across a fossil embedded in stone. Or bones scattered by time. What would they have seen? A riddle. A skeleton far too large. Too strange. To explain. So they gave it a story. That must have been a creature of fire. They might have whispered. A guardian of the skies. A beast of legend. And so, dinosaurs became dragons. And dragons became dreams. Leia walked slowly along a ridgeline. Watching ancient creatures move through the mists. Tails winding, wings flapping. Scales catching soft light like emeralds in fog. There was something beautiful in it. The way our minds tried to remember. What we had never seen. But somehow knew. Even today, in picture books, movies, and dreams. We still draw them. Still imagine them. Still tell their stories. Sometimes with wings. Sometimes with fire. But always with wonder. Because dinosaurs may be ancient. But imagination keeps them close. Leia opened her eyes. The book still rested in her lap. The room was dim. And outside, the sky had deepened to navy blue. She turned to a fresh page in her journal. And wrote. Asterisk, dragons are not just fantasy. They are memory in disguise. A dream of something the earth once held. And still whispers through us. In story. Asterisk. The children who remember. It was a quiet Saturday morning at the museum. Soft sunlight filtered through high windows. Dust dancing in the beams like sleepy stars. Dr. Leia arrived early. As she always did. To prepare the exhibit for the weekend visitors. She didn't mind the quiet. She liked the hush before the doors opened. But today, there was a new kind of energy in the air. As if something joyful was waiting just around the corner. And then the doors opened. The first little feet pattered in. And laughter floated up into the high halls. Like birdsong through stone. Children. Dozens of them. Wide-eyed, curious, full of questions. And sticky fingers holding juice boxes and notebooks. One little girl ran straight to the towering skeleton. In the center of the room. A diplodocus, its neck stretched high above their heads. She stared at it in silence for a long moment. Then, she turned and asked. Did it like the color green? Dr. Leia knelt beside her, smiling. Probably, she said softly. There were a lot of ferns. Maybe it had a favorite one. The little girl nodded. Satisfied. As if that answer had opened something secret and magical inside her. All around the room, other children pressed their hands to glass cases. Whispered to each other. And stared up with awe. Not fear. Not confusion. But recognition. As if they already knew. Children, Leia thought. Carry memory in ways we forget. Dinosaurs aren't just prehistoric animals to them. They are friends. Heroes. Mysteries to love, not just solve. They ask. What did it eat? Could it sing? Did it have a best friend? Could I ride one if it were gentle? Not because they need to know. But because they need to imagine. And in that imagination, they remember. Later that day, a small boy approached Dr. Leia with a plastic T-Rex in his hand. He held it up to her and whispered. He's not scary when you're nice to him. She nodded solemnly. Most things aren't, she replied. That night, after the children had gone home, and the halls had grown quiet again, Dr. Leia sat at her desk and opened her journal. She didn't write a full entry. Just a single line. The youngest among us are the ones who remember the farthest back. She closed her eyes, smiling softly. And in her dreams, 100 small voices laughed among the ferns. As the dinosaurs walked slowly beside them. Like gentle giants in a story with no end. The patience of bones. The museum's fossil lab was silent now. Tables stood covered in trays of ancient stone. Brushes, magnifying lenses. And little numbered tags. Like whispers waiting to be heard. Dr. Leia stood at the doorway. Watching the light spill across a half-cleaned fossil. Just the curve of a jawbone. Still nestled in the cradle of stone that had held it for millions of years. You've waited so long. She thought. And now, someone listens. She stepped inside. Each footfall soft. Careful not to disturb the delicate stillness of the room. This was not the noisy side of science. Not the thrilling one shown in movies. This was the gentle science. The quiet, devoted kind. Where time doesn't shout. It reveals. She remembered her first time in a field dig. The sun had been warm. The wind steady. And the earth had felt like it was telling secrets. Beneath her fingertips. Every time the brush swept gently over stone. She held her breath. Not because she was afraid of breaking it. But because it felt like touching something sacred. One day, she'd uncovered a single claw. Small, curved. Frozen in motion for millions of years. She had held it in her hand and whispered. You were part of someone. You ran. You scratched the dirt. You lived. That was when she knew. She wasn't just studying bones. She was listening to stories. Long buried. But never lost. Now, years later, she stood by that jawbone again. Not rushing. Not interrupting. Only observing. The fossils did not need to hurry. They had waded through ice, fire, silence, and sand. They would wait a little longer. For the world to remember. She opened her journal. And wrote slowly. Paleontology is not about finding things. It's about waiting with them. And learning to hear what they've kept quiet. For a very long time. As the lights dimmed for the evening, Dr. Leah whispered to the fossil on the table. You're not just stone. You are memory. And tonight, you are safe. The first feathers. In a quiet fossil lab tucked beneath the museum's main floor. Dr. Leah carefully brushed dust from a delicate imprint. So faint. So fine. That it almost vanished if you looked too quickly. But when you really looked, you saw something extraordinary. Not scales. Not claws. Not teeth. But feathers. Not big ones, either. Just tiny wisps, like soft shadows pressed into stone. They belonged to a dinosaur called Enkiornis. A small, bird-like creature that had lived nearly 160 million years ago. Long before eagles soared. Before sparrows chirped. Before even chickens scratched the dirt. This little dinosaur wore feathers. Were they for flight? Leah wondered. Or for warmth? Or for show? The truth was, we didn't fully know. But that's what made it beautiful. Because here was a reminder. That evolution doesn't leap. It drifts. Gently. Patiently. Feathers didn't appear all at once. They started small. A few strands here. A soft patch there. Not for flying. But maybe to stay warm. Or to impress a mate. Or to blend into ferns and shadows. Nature was testing, adjusting. Becoming. And eventually, those feathers learned to fly. Dr. Leah smiled as she held the stone. Because she knew that when we look at birds today, we're not just seeing wings. We're seeing the past. In pigeons, robins, owls. There are whispers of their ancient cousins. And that means dinosaurs, in a way, never left. She opened her journal and wrote. The tiniest changes become the biggest stories. Feathers began as threads of survival. And became threads of the sky. Outside, on the museum windowsill. A small finch landed and fluffed its wings. Tilting its head as if listening. To the story being told inside. And for just a moment. The past and the present. Sat side by side. Feathered and free. Secrets in the stone. Dr. Leah stood before a large slab of rock in the museum's basement. Quiet, unassuming. And far too heavy to move without a team. At first glance, it looked like any other stone. Gray. Flat. Still. But Leah knew better. Because when light touched it from the side, and shadow bent just the right way, something began to appear. A ripple. A swirl. The faint curve of a footprint. Frozen in stone for more than 100 million years. Not all fossils are bones, she whispered. Some are moments. Some are the soft echo of motion. Caught forever in Earth's memory. She gently brushed the surface. Careful not to disturb the dust that time had laid down like a blanket. And there it was. A trackway. Just a few steps. Pressed into ancient mud. And slowly turned to stone. By time, pressure, and patience. She closed her eyes. And the museum began to fade. The stone softened into earth. The dust gave way to warm wind. And suddenly, she was standing on the edge of a riverbed. Millions of years ago. A dinosaur had walked here. Not a predator. Not a giant. Just a wanderer. Its feet moved through the mud. Careful and slow. Leaving behind shallow impressions that told no grand story. Except that it had been there. Alive. Present. Passing through. Leia knelt beside the track and placed her hand beside it. They were not so different in size. And for a quiet moment, she felt something strange and lovely. Not like looking at the past, but like the past was looking back. When she returned to the present, the rock still sat quietly in its case. The prints faint but clear. She opened her journal and wrote. Some of the most powerful traces are the ones left without intention. A step in the mud. A breath in the dark. Time does not always forget. Sometimes, it remembers. In stone. The end that became a beginning. Dr. Leia sat beneath the dim glow of a reading lamp. Her tea slowly cooling beside her. Unnoticed. On her lap rested a book. Not a scientific one this time. But a storybook. The kind filled with fairy tales. Open skies. And endings. She traced a finger over the last page. Where the words read softly. And then the world changed. That's how she'd always felt about the dinosaurs. People said they'd ended. Vanished. Gone in fire and dust. But Leia didn't believe in sudden finalities. She believed in transformation. She closed her eyes. And the world shifted again. Not to a jungle. Not to a nest or a fossil bed. But to something different. A wide and silent dusk. The sky glowed amber and purple. The trees were black silhouettes. And the air shimmered with something unspoken. This was the in-between. The space after the meteor. After the fires. After the smoke. Not destruction. Not yet renewal. Just stillness. All around her, the world was waiting. The great bodies had fallen. The forests were hushed. And the earth, though wounded, was breathing. In that silence, small lives stirred. Mammals crept out of burrows. Insects fluttered back to leaves. Seeds pressed gently into soil. Even now, life was thinking forward. Not loudly. Not quickly. But truly. Extinction isn't just an end. Leia whispered into the quiet of her mind. It's a change in rhythm. A breath between verses. And though the age of dinosaurs had passed, it hadn't disappeared. It had evolved. Softened. Scattered. Hidden in birdsong. Carried in bones. And slowly, the story continued. Back in the museum, Leia turned the page. There was no the end. Only space. White, open. Ready. She opened her journal. And with a quiet breath, wrote. The earth does not close chapters. It blends them. What we call endings are often beginnings in disguise. Time beyond clocks. The museum was nearly empty. Only the soft humming of the lights and the gentle tick of the old wall clock kept Dr. Leia company. She looked up at it, watching the second hand sweep in a slow circle. Precise. Predictable. And yet, in the quiet of that moment, she felt something else. Something older. Time, she thought, was not always measured by seconds and minutes. There was a time before clocks. Before calendars. Before numbers carved the day into tiny boxes. A time when time was written in stone. In rings of trees. In layers of earth. In bones. She closed her eyes. And slowly, the museum around her faded again. This time, she stood in a canyon. Walls rising high around her. Each one streaked with layers of color. Rust red. Sand yellow. Ash gray. Each layer. A memory. A quiet bookmark. In the story of Earth. She reached out. Her fingers brushing across the stone. She imagined peeling back the layers. Like pages in a book made not of paper. But of moments so long ago. They no longer had names. There were layers formed by ancient seas. Layers pressed by the feet of dinosaurs. Layers scattered with pollen from long-lost flowers. Each one. A whisper from a world. That once was. She saw time not as a line. But as depth. A vertical memory. Not ticking forward. But stretching downward. Into soil. Into rock. Into the roots of things. She thought of how dinosaurs helped us see that. Before their bones were found. We thought the world was young. Simple. Brief. But then we uncovered skulls. Teeth. Tracks. We counted layers. Measured distances in millions of years. And we understood. Not everything happens in our kind of time. Back in the museum. Leia opened her eyes. The clock still ticked. But now. She listened to it differently. Not as a reminder of hours. But as an echo of something deeper. She opened her journal. And wrote. Asterisk, time does not live only in clocks. It lives in mountains. In fossils. In the long breath of the earth itself. Dinosaurs taught us to measure with wonder. Not just with numbers. Asterisk. When we found them. Dr. Leia stood in the center of the museum's grand gallery. Surrounded by bones that once walked beneath alien stars. Now they stood still. Assembled carefully under spotlights and signs. People came here every day. Children. Parents. Tourists with headphones. Students with notebooks. They pointed. They asked questions. They stared in awe. But they weren't just looking at bones. They were looking at the edge of everything they knew. Leia sat on the edge of a bench. Watching a boy press his hands to the glass of the T-Rex exhibit. His eyes were wide, his breath fogging the display. Is that really real? He whispered to no one in particular. And Leia smiled. Because that one question held so much. It hadn't always been known. There was a time. Not too long ago. When people had never heard of dinosaurs. When bones were thought to be the remains of dragons. Giants. Mythical beasts. And then. We found them. In fields. In quarries. Buried beneath hills. Bits of teeth. Fragments of skulls. Spines that curled in rock like secret signatures. The earth began revealing her hidden library. And suddenly, our idea of the world got bigger. The word dinosaur was coined in 1842. Terrible lizard, it meant. But they weren't terrible at all. They were simply from before. The discovery reshaped science. It told us the earth had layers of time. It proved extinction was real. It reminded us that nothing, not even the mightiest, lasts forever. Artists began to draw them. Writers gave them stories. Filmmakers brought them to life. And slowly, dinosaurs moved from rock to culture. From silence to imagination. Dr. Leia looked around her. At the fossils. The photographs. The quiet hum of the museum walls. This space was sacred. Not because of what it held, but because of what it awakened. She opened her journal and wrote. The moment we found the first fossil. We found a new part of ourselves. We were no longer the first. We were part of a much older story. She placed her pen down, closed her eyes, and let the quiet fill her mind. In the stillness, she could almost hear the distant sound of stone giving up its secret. For the very first time. Wings from the past. Dr. Leia stood in the museum's rooftop garden, wrapped in a scarf, watching the morning sky bloom with light. A soft breeze rustled the trees around her, and the first birds of the day were already singing. High notes. Low trills. Each one a tiny thread in the fabric of dawn. And she thought. Not for the first time. I'm surrounded by dinosaurs. Not the towering kind. Not the sharp-toothed kind. But real ones. Feathered. Light-boned. Alive. She remembered the fossils she had once seen in a dusty case. Archaeopteryx. A creature caught between bird and reptile. Feathers splayed like frozen fireworks. Clawed fingers still clinging to a long, ancient tail. Not quite bird. Not quite dinosaur. But something in between. A bridge. A whisper. Leia closed her eyes. And this time, she was in a warm jungle. Dense, green, and dappled with golden light. Above her, small creatures leapt from branch to branch. They didn't roar. They chirped. They glided. And eventually, they flew. Not because they wanted to conquer the sky, but because the world asked them to adapt. And they said yes. That's what survival really is, she thought. Not force. Not strength. But flexibility. Curiosity. The courage to become something new. Back in the garden. A sparrow landed on the railing near her. Its head tilted. One eye watching her with interest. It fluffed its feathers. And let out a single, cheerful note. So small. So ordinary. And yet. A miracle of time. You are what remains, she whispered to it. You're proof that the story didn't end. It just changed shape. She opened her journal and wrote. The sky is not empty. It carries the memory of creatures who learned to rise. Birds are not just birds. They are the living breath of deep time. Dinosaurs, dressed in song. The sparrow took off. Wings slicing the light. As easily as dreams. And Leia smiled. Knowing that some parts of the past are still with us. If we only look up. Bones that remember. The museum was closing. The lights were dim. And the last echoes of visitors' footsteps had faded into the marble floors. Dr. Leia stood in the human anatomy wing. A place most guests passed through quickly. On their way to see something more exciting. But she loved it here. Because here, among the ribs and joints, the spine and skull, was a truth that many people missed. We are not so new. She walked slowly past the skeletons. One adult. One child. Posed as if walking, frozen mid-step. And she looked at the shape of the hips. The curve of the arms. The placement of the toes. She could see it. The lineage. She closed her eyes. And time unraveled. Like thread pulled gently from a fabric. Now she was standing in a quiet grove. Millions of years ago. A feathered dinosaur walked past her. Small, two-legged. its arms tipped with claws, its eyes bright. It paused, just for a moment, and shifted its weight. And in that motion, she saw it. The balance. The gait. The rhythm. So familiar. Just like a person walking through a forest trail today. She followed it with her eyes. And then looked down at her own hands. Fingers. Knuckles. Wrist bones that had once supported wings or claws. Our bodies are libraries, she thought. Not of words. But of forms. Of functions long refined by time. Even our balance. How we shift from heel to toe. Carries whispers from long ago. The way we breathe. With lungs folded like soft origami. The way our necks turn. How our spines curve. They all carry tiny echoes. Not identical. But familiar. Not ancient. But inherited. Back in the quiet museum. Leia sat on a bench and placed her hand on her chest. One heartbeat. Then another. And she smiled. Knowing her very body. Her bones, her breath. Was shaped by a story. Far older than her name. She opened her journal and wrote. I am not separate from the ancient world. I am part of its continuation. I walk with bones that remember. Creatures who ran before me. And that memory moves with every step I take. The world they left for us. The stars were just beginning to appear over the museum's rooftop. Dr. Leia leaned on the railing. A thermos of warm tea in her hands. Watching as the city slowly hushed beneath a soft navy sky. She was thinking of absences. The kind that don't feel like emptiness. But like open ground. Fresh soil. Waiting. If dinosaurs had never gone extinct. She thought. Would we be here at all? The question wasn't sad. It was full of wonder. Because their ending wasn't just a vanishing. It was a clearing. And life. As it always does. Stepped quietly into the space they left behind. She closed her eyes. And saw it all unfold. A fiery sky. A shuddering earth. Then, a deep and aching silence. The mighty had fallen. The loud had gone quiet. And for a time. The world seemed still. But not for long. From the underbrush. Small mammals began to emerge. Not in a rush. Not in triumph. Just curious. Cautious. They scurried. They nested. They survived. They didn't know they'd been given a chance. They simply lived. From these small, fur-covered beings. Came others. With longer limbs. Bigger brains. Hands that grasped. Eyes that noticed the moon. Eventually. Those eyes would turn upward and wonder. Where did we come from? And that question. That reaching back into time. Was only possible. Because the dinosaurs had stepped away. Dr. Leia sipped her tea. Its warmth like a stone in her hands. They made room, she whispered. Not for us on purpose. But by being part of the pattern. It wasn't sacrifice. It wasn't tragedy. It was the earth doing. What it has always done. Changing. Turning. Becoming. She opened her journal and wrote. The age of dinosaurs ended. So that another story could begin. Ours. But we are not separate from them. We are a continuation. Born from the space they left behind. Above her, a bird passed across the moon. Wings outstretched. Silent and sure. And somewhere in that fluttering silhouette. A dinosaur still soared. The Legacy of Wonder. It was Sunday morning at the museum. And in one quiet corner, Dr. Leia was carefully rearranging a shelf in the gift shop. Not bones. Not stones. Just toys. Plush dinosaurs. Mini skeleton kits. Puzzles and pop-up books. Bright colors, soft textures. And tags that read, ages 3 and up. She smiled. Because this too was part of the story. Across the lobby, a young girl twirled in a green hoodie with a tail stitched to the back. Her father trailed behind her, carrying a bag filled with dino figurines. Nearby, a little boy clutched a T-Rex in one hand and a chicken nugget in the other, asking very seriously, if dinosaurs turned into birds, why don't birds have teeth? Leia laughed softly. Because these weren't just questions. They were keys. Dinosaurs had become more than ancient creatures. They had become portals. Into science. Into art. Into imagination. They lived in crayon drawings. Open book bedtime stories. Movie camera movies filled with roars and volcanoes. Brain classrooms where students learned about evolution, extinction, and Earth itself. They were the first spark for many young minds. Not just to learn, but to wonder. And isn't that the real gift? Not just knowing dinosaurs existed, but feeling your world expand. The moment you meet them. Realizing that time is vast. That life is mysterious. That even the impossible might once have walked beside a fern. Leia thought of her own childhood bedroom. Walls taped with drawings of triceratops and long-necked giants. How she used to whisper goodnight to her stuffed stegosaurus. As if it might dream too. We don't just study dinosaurs. She thought. We carry them with us. In play. In stories. In every child who wants to dig for treasure. Under the garden rocks. She opened her journal. Her handwriting soft and slow. Asterisk, some things become legends. Others become lessons. But the rarest become both. Asterisk. Dinosaurs live not just in bones, but in every heart that still wonders what once was. And what still might be. Outside the museum. The wind picked up slightly. Rustling the trees. And for a moment, Leia imagined a young dinosaur. Peeking through the leaves. Curious. Watchful. Not quite gone. The ground beneath us. Dr. Leia stood in the museum's geology wing. Her fingers resting lightly on a globe the size of a beach ball. But this globe was special. It didn't just show the continents as they are today. It showed how they had moved over time. When she spun it slowly, the land masses drifted apart. Then back together again. A slow, beautiful dance. Across the surface of deep time. Continents, she whispered. Don't stay still. They travel. Like very patient clouds. She thought of the dinosaurs. How they roamed across Pangaea. A single, massive land long before our maps were born. In those days, there were no borders. Just vast stretches of forest and fern. And the quiet footsteps of creatures who didn't yet know the ground was moving. She imagined a sauropod. Tall, heavy, gentle. Walking slowly across a plain that would one day split into Africa and South America. Its footprints pressed into the earth. Each one a marker of a journey. Long lost beneath shifting soil. Fossils are not just clues about animals. Leia thought. They're clues about Earth itself. About how mountains rose. Oceans widened. Valleys opened. And how, without saying a word, The planet rewrote its own shape. Plate tectonics. Continental drift. Subduction zones. These were the quiet engines of change. And dinosaurs had lived right on top of them, never knowing that their world was floating. Slowly, surely, on molten currents below. Back in the museum, Leia ran her hand over a slab of stone, streaked with ancient ripple marks. This rock, she smiled, was once the bottom of a sea. Now it's part of a mountain. She opened her journal and wrote. The Earth has a memory. Deeper than any fossil. Dinosaurs remind us that even the ground beneath our feet is part of the story. And that change, though slow, is always moving. Far below, in the museum's fossil lab, new samples rested quietly. Fragments of rock. Tiny shells. The soft imprint of a leaf that once waved in a prehistoric breeze. And just like the land itself, the story was still unfolding. Shadows in the future. The lights in the museum's innovation wing were soft and low. Here, the past met the future. Fossils beneath glass cases. And beside them, robots. Dr. Leia walked slowly past a display. A robotic leg, built to mimic the gait of a raptor. Its joints moved with fluid precision. Its balance, perfect. Not because it copied a machine, but because it borrowed from life that had evolved over millions of years. Nature, she thought, is the original engineer. And dinosaurs were her boldest designs. She moved to the next exhibit, where a sleek drone hung suspended from the ceiling. Its wings curved like the arms of ancient flying reptiles. Its sensors watched silently, like sharp avian eyes. And then she smiled, remembering the first time she saw a science fiction movie as a child. A spaceship shaped like the rib cage of a long-dead creature, soaring through space. Dinosaurs had always had a place in the futures we imagined. In books. In games. In movies. They were protectors, predators, companions. Sometimes terrifying. Sometimes beautiful. But always captivating. Even architects had studied dinosaur bones. The way they distributed weight. The hollow but strong structure of their limbs. To build stronger bridges. Taller towers. And safer helmets. In a nearby glass case, a student project displayed a robotic tail. It could shift weight, change direction, stabilize the body. A tiny marvel, inspired by the long tails of ancient creatures, who used them not for beauty, but for balance. Dr. Leia rested her hands on the edge of the case. The bones we dig up, she thought, are not just relics. They're blueprints. The more we study dinosaurs, the more we learn about how to build. Not just in stone or metal, but in movement, in structure, in imagination. She opened her journal once more. The ancient world whispers to our modern minds. Every claw, every wing, every spine holds a lesson. Not just in where we came from, but in where we might go. In the quiet that followed, a small mechanical creature powered on in the corner. Its tail swaying gently. Its legs clicking softly across the floor. And Leia smiled. Because even in the hum of circuitry and steel, something very old was walking once again. The emotion in their echo. It was just past closing time. The museum halls had fallen still. And Dr. Leia moved slowly through the great dinosaur gallery, where shadows stretched long across the marble floor. Above her, a towering skeleton of a sauropod stood in perfect stillness. Its neck arched gently toward the ceiling, its tail curling like a river of memory. And Leia paused. Why do we care so much about them, she wondered. Why does every child, at some point, fall in love with dinosaurs? Why do adults still whisper in awe beneath their bones? Why do these creatures, long gone, make our hearts beat a little faster? She walked softly past a display of claws, and paused at a tooth the size of her hand. Sharp. Impossibly old. And yet, somehow, familiar. The feeling wasn't fear. Not quite. It was something gentler. Awe. Longing. A sense of being part of something far bigger than herself. She remembered the first time she saw a dinosaur skeleton. She had been 7 years old. Standing beneath the towering ribs of a triceratops. It had felt like standing in the presence of a ghost. That wasn't scary, but comforting. Like a grandparent you never met, but somehow knew. That feeling had stayed with her. Not just in her career, but in her breath. In her dreams. Dinosaurs, she thought, make us feel both small and deeply connected. They remind us how young we are, and how long the world has been turning without us. They show us that life is fragile, but also, that life endures. Their silence is part of their power. They don't speak, but they say everything. They remind us of mystery, of change, of time's deep and beautiful weight. Dr. Leia leaned against a pillar, eyes resting on the skeleton's gentle curve. She took a slow breath, and opened her journal. Asterisk, there is something ancient in us that recognizes something ancient in them. Perhaps that's why we feel so much when we see their bones. It's not just science. It's memory. Older than words. Asterisk. Outside, a breeze swept through the trees. Leaves rustled. A crow cried softly. And in the hush that followed, the whole earth felt like it was listening, too. Lessons in balance. The museum was quiet again. But tonight, Dr. Leia wasn't in the fossil halls, or the rooftop garden. She had wandered into a small exhibit on ecosystems. A tucked-away room filled with models of plants, insects, and prehistoric habitats. The lighting was soft. The air cool. And everything inside whispered of one thing. Interconnection. She sat down on a bench, her eyes drifting toward a glass case that held a perfect model of a Cretaceous forest. There were no roaring predators here. No sharp teeth or thunderous feet. Just tall ferns, tiny mammals, and birds gliding silently through the canopy. It was peaceful, balanced, alive. This is what we forget, she thought. Dinosaurs weren't just creatures of drama. They were part of systems. Webs of life. Soil. Light. Rain. She imagined one of those ancient forests. A herd of herbivores grazing. Smaller animals darting between trees. The call of an early bird echoing through the air. Each being had a role. No creature lived alone. No action was without consequence. But sometimes, things shift too far. The climate changes. The food chain buckles. The balance tips. And even the great fall. Leia thought of the asteroid. Yes, that sudden end. But she also thought of the slow, quiet stresses that came before. The warming seas. The changing plants. The volcanic skies. The world, she wrote, had already begun to unravel. Long before it shattered. She paused, pen in hand. Because the message wasn't just about dinosaurs. It was about now. Us. This planet. She looked around at the display again. Noticing the delicate leaves. The model dragonflies. The moss-covered logs. We're still part of this. She whispered. Still part of the same puzzle. The same dance. She opened her journal fully and wrote slowly. Dinosaurs remind us. Not just of endings. But of warning signs. Of how everything depends. On everything else. And that balance. Once broken. Is not easily repaired. Then she added, more softly. The lesson is not fear. But care. To move gently. To live as part of the earth. Not above it. And as the lights dimmed in that quiet little room, Dr. Leia sat still among the models of life long gone. Feeling, deeply, how very much of it still applied to today. Carved into culture. It was raining softly outside the museum. The drops tapped gently against the windows. Like the soft ticking of ancient time. Inside, Dr. Leia stood in the museum's central atrium, where murals stretched across the domed ceiling above. There, in painted motion, dinosaurs walked across prehistoric landscapes. Brontosaurs under fern-filled skies. Raptors darting through trees. Pterosaurs catching the wind above distant volcanoes. Each brushstroke told a story. And none of them were just about bones. This, Leia whispered to herself, is art. But it's also memory. Because even though no human ever saw a dinosaur, we carry them. In stories. In symbols. In sculpture. In song. They're not just part of science. They're part of us. She wandered slowly through a side exhibit. Called Dinosaurs in the Human Imagination. There were artist palette cave-like etchings from early cultures. Storybooks from the 1800s. Movie camera film posters with jaws wide and eyes glowing. Teddy bear plush toys worn soft by time. And each one said something different. To some, dinosaurs were monsters. To others, ancestors. To others still, silent companions from before we were born. She paused in front of a statue carved from stone. A modern artist's rendering of a dinosaur skull. With flowers blooming from its eyes. It was beautiful. A fusion of life and death. Past and present. Extinction and rebirth. Even now, Leia thought. We're still finding ways to understand them. Because they mean different things to different people. To scientists, they are knowledge. To children, they are magic. To poets, they are metaphors. To museums, they are memories made visible. She opened her journal and wrote softly. Dinosaurs are not just fossils. They are part of our language. Our wonder. Our warning. They live in science, yes. But also in art. In dreams. And in the stories we choose to pass on. The rain outside continued. But inside the museum, everything felt still. Like a temple not just for bones. But for meaning. The questions that remain. It was late. The museum had long since closed. But Dr. Leia remained in her favorite place. The Paleontology Archives. Here, under quiet lights. Drawers slid open with a whisper. And each one held a fragment of the unknown. A claw. A tooth. A ridge of fossilized skin. Pieces of lives that once moved, breathed, hunted, and slept. Now silent. Patient. Still not fully understood. We've learned so much, she thought. But still, not everything. She ran her fingers along a fossil imprint. So fine it captured the texture of feathers. It had taken millions of years to form. And yet, it only told part of the story. What color had those feathers been? What sounds had that creature made? Did it raise its young? Was it clever? Was it afraid of the dark? Even with all our science, those answers remain just out of reach. And maybe that's okay. Because mystery isn't the enemy of knowledge. It's its companion. Without mystery, there would be no wonder. No curiosity. No spark that drives us to dig. To dream. To ask. She smiled, remembering a child from earlier that week. A girl with wide eyes who had asked, could there still be a dinosaur no one has found yet? And the truth was, yes. Absolutely, yes. Every year, new species are discovered. In deserts. In cliffs. In places where wind and time have gently peeled back the surface of the earth. Just enough to reveal a clue. A puzzle piece. A name waiting to be spoken for the first time. Dr. Leia opened her journal. The air smelled faintly of dust and stone. The weight of time hung sweet and soft around her. She wrote. Dinosaurs remind us that the Earth is not fully mapped. Not completely known. That just beneath the surface, wonders are waiting. And that mystery, far from being a flaw in science, is what makes it alive. She closed the journal, turned off the lamp, and walked through the darkened hallway. As quietly as the fossils themselves. Behind her, the drawers stayed shut. But not silent. Inside them, the past still whispered. And the future still listened. Science that grows. Dr. Leia sat at her desk. A cup of chamomile tea warming her hands. And an open notebook before her. Half filled with notes, half filled with questions. Behind her, the soft hum of the museum's climate system whispered through the air. The fossil halls stood still. But the ideas swirling in her mind were anything but quiet. When I was a child, she thought, dinosaurs dragged their tails. Now, we know they held them high. Back then, we thought they were cold and sluggish. Now we know, they were warm-blooded. Fast. And full of life. She smiled gently. Even the mighty T-Rex, once imagined as a roaring, wild brute, was now believed to be more complex. Perhaps even a caregiver. Watching over its young. Its massive form built not just for terror, but for balance. And what about feathers? Once, the idea sounded absurd. Now, it was beautifully ordinary. Fossils found in China. So delicate they showed the traces of soft down. Had changed the image of dinosaurs forever. They weren't just scaly giants. Some were soft. Bright. Bird-like. That's the beauty of science, she thought. It admits when it was wrong. It grows. It lets go of old stories. To make space for better ones. She thought of the young students who now visited the museum. Already knowing more than she did at their age. Their textbooks filled with things she had never read in school. Because knowledge wasn't a castle. It was a garden, always growing. Always changing with the seasons of discovery. She turned the page in her notebook and wrote. To study dinosaurs. Is not to cling to what we know. It is to remain open. To new bones. New theories. And new voices. She paused, then added. Every fossil is a beginning. Not an ending. The story of life on Earth is still being written. Asterisk. Outside, the stars turned slowly above the museum. Inside, the skeletons stood quietly. Not as symbols of finality, but as invitations. To wonder. To explore. To change your mind. Time without hurry. The museum was completely still. Even the low hum of the lights had quieted. As if the building itself had fallen asleep. Dr. Leia sat once more in the great fossil hall. Beneath the sweeping ribs of a long-necked giant. Her notebook was closed. Her tea had gone cold. But her mind was warm with thought. She wasn't thinking about extinction tonight. Not about discovery. Not about science. She was thinking about time. The kind of time that isn't marked by clocks or calendars. The kind that doesn't rush. The kind that stretches quietly. Gently. Across the ages. Like the steady breath of the earth itself. Dinosaurs lived for millions of years. Not just as a group. But as a story unfolding slowly. One creature, one footstep, one breath at a time. We think of them as long ago. But they lived far longer than we've even existed. And yet, they are gone. And we, brief, blinking creatures, are here. How humbling, Leia thought. To know that the bones beneath my feet once belonged to lives that felt just as real as mine. They walked. They ate. They slept. They raised their young. They noticed the sky. And then they disappeared. But not really. Because every time we learn, every time we wonder, every time we pause and listen, they return. Not in body, but in presence. In every book. Every fossil. Every child who says, "What's a triceratops?" Time folds inward. And the distance between then and now becomes very small. Dr. Leia leaned back in her chair. The room was full of bones. But it didn't feel empty. It felt full. Full of stories. Full of echoes. Full of meaning. She opened her journal one last time and wrote. Asterisk, dinosaurs are not just gone. They are woven into the story of Earth. And through them, we learn not just about the past, but how to move gently through time. Asterisk. She closed her eyes. And in that stillness, she felt something vast. Not heavy. Not frightening. Just deep. And kind. And full of stars.